All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And in my unending quest to make the material for AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies and AWD 1111 Database Driven Web Development, or whatever it's called, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the ebooks written by Mr. Flavio Copes. And so far I've done his HTML ebook, and I'm in the middle of his CSS ebook. And with where I am right now, we're up to page 103 of 173, and that is talking about CSS grid. All right. Now, grid and or Flexbox, which we'll talk about in the next series of videos, about the next 20 pages or so, or 20 to 30 pages of this ebook, are pretty much replacing using floats. All right. So it says here, grid is the new kid in the CSS town. While not fully supported by browsers, it's going to be the future system for layouts. I'd agree with that, but as far as, again, if we wanted to know how it's supported, we would just go into caniuse.com and type in here CSS grid. And you'll see, yeah, there is still a little bit of red in here, but it's all on later versions of things. For instance, IE 10 and 11 have got partial support. Edge, after version 16, has got full support, etc., as you take a look through here. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly, when we did this before, remember from the last video, and I don't know where my head is at, but I was thinking about this, and it's like, this is not list style type none. It is text decoration none. And that should and does remove the underlines. All right. The list style type got rid of any bullets that we had. All right. So I don't know what I was thinking, but it wasn't right. How's that? So CSS grid is a fundamentally new approach to building layouts using CSS. Keep an eye out on the CSS grid layout page on caniuse.com to find out which browsers. Well, I already went there to show you that. All right. CSS grid is not a competitor to Flexbox. They interoperate and collaborate on complex layouts. So the idea is, when you are doing layouts and you are doing it based on using floats, it's not even that it's messy, but it's just clunky, for lack of better words, kind of clunky to work with. But if you replace the floats that you're working on and you go in there and you replace them with grid and or Flexbox, which means you can use one, the other, or both together. All right. It's going to allow you to do things in a much easier way once you understand it. As they mention here, building layouts for the web has traditionally been a complicated topic. All right. But you now have these two tools to work on. It said these two are the tools to build the web layouts of the future. And I'd agree with that. Unless you need to support old browsers, there's no need to be using any of this stuff. So let's start at the very beginning. It says in this guide, there's all you need to know about going from zero knowledge of CSS grid to being a proficient user. It doesn't say that you're an expert, it says that you're proficient at using it. So the grid layout is activated on a container element, which can be a div or any other tag, by using display grid. All right. So in other words, we can come back in to what we've been working on in here. All right, and let's go and undo these comments and these as well. All right, so we've added this stuff back. So in other words, our page now looks like this. Nothing fantastic. All right, but we can come in here And where we've got all this stuff, I'll just leave that in for that's with the unordered list. That's fine. And we will say div display grid. Now, hey, nothing magical happened, Jeff. I understand that. All right. Just hold on, and we'll be going through it for the next at least couple of lectures. So again, as mentioned, the grid layout is activated on the container element, which can be a div, or it says, or any other tag with display grid. As with Flexbox, you can define some properties on the container and some properties on each individual item in the grid. And these properties, as it says, combined will determine the final look and feel, so to speak, of the grid. The most basic container are grid template columns and grid template rows. So, as mentioned here, these properties define the number of columns and rows in the grid, and they also set the width of each row or of each column. So when you look at this, and let's take a look, it says the following snippet defines a grid with 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, each 200 pixels wide, so it's 800 pixels total, and 2 rows, each of which are 300 pixels high. So let's grab this. Let's go back to here, and let's start by putting that in. That's fine. Now let's go back to our index here, and let's comment out everything that's in here. All right, so everything as far as I can tell now. We don't need this anymore. I believe everything that we had in there is commented out, and I can tell for sure by going in here and doing this. So doing a save and coming back to here, and there's nothing in there. Now, when I say there's nothing in there, what I mean is everything that was in there has been commented out, okay? So what we're asking the system to make right here, 4 columns, 2 rows. 4 columns, 200, 200, 200, 200. All right, 200, 200, 200, 200, and 2 rows. Row, 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 300 high, 300 high, 300 high, 300 high, etc. Here's another example, as I mentioned, with 2 rows and 2 columns, so it's going to look like a square. Or I guess like a rectangle, because it's 200 by 100. If it was 200 by 200, it would look like a square. All right. Many times you might have a fixed header size, a fixed footer size, and the main content is flexible in height depending on its length. In this case, you can use the auto keyword. So with these rows, the first row is representing the header, the third row is representing the footer, and the one in the middle is representing the main or content area. All right. In the above examples, we made regular grids by using the same values for rows and the same values for columns. But as mentioned there, you can specify any value you want. And this is where this really starts to change. All right. And what I mean is you get more irregular looking stuff in here. So let's look and see what we mean. See that? And there's another example. Now, who cares about this? Well, back in the olden days, like in the 90s, we used something that was called frames. In fact, some of them, not an iframe, some of them are still kind of in use today. You know, sometimes, most of the time you see when you see a list of hyperlinks, etc., they're in here like this. All right, in other words, they're horizontal. But it used to be more in vogue that they were vertical. So you could set those up in here. That could be your nav section. This could be your main section. And down here, that could be your footer section. So this almost ends up becoming the header in here since it's your nav. Unless specified, there is no space between cells. All right, you can add space, as it says, by adding column gap or row gap to the grid. All right. So here they've added that, and that's just that area that's in here or both. And as mentioned, there's shorthands for these. That's not that big of a thing one way or the other. All right. Every cell item has the option to occupy more than just one box in the row and expand itself horizontally or vertically to get more space while respecting the grid proportions. As it says, these are the properties that you use for that to set everything up. So what they're doing in here is they're giving you a bunch of CSS. Now, nothing wrong with that. It's a great introduction, but I wanted to show you something. And that is, there is a gentleman whose name is, I believe it's Wes Bose. I think that's what it is. And he has a class in Flexbox and he has a class in Grid, and they're both free. So I'm going to put Grid in here. All right. Learn all about CSS Grid with Wes Bose in this. So this is it. You sign up for it by giving your email address in there. So I can put my rank and address in. All right, and click. It says almost done. You'll get a confirmation email anytime now. So I go in here. There it is. It says, are you ready to start learning? Access the course. All right, I've already got an account set up with him. But the point is this, I sign in and notice he's got one on Grid and one on Flexbox. All right. And it says in October, I actually set these things up. All right. And he's got other courses. There's learning JavaScript in 30 days, but I'm just going to click on here. And notice what it has. There's a bunch of videos. Now, again, I hear this all the time from people. I don't have time to watch videos. Well, let's look. 11 minutes, 9 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. My guess is if you looked at the whole thing and you went through all 25 of these videos, you could do it probably in 2 or 3 hours. All right. Now, is that a great idea to sit and look at all of them at once? Well, you know what? We very well might do that in class. All right. And then when we get to the next part, do the same thing with Flexbox because it's set up the same way. I think there's only 20 videos in there. All right. So let me close this and this and this. There we go. I just wanted to mention that because a lot of what we've seen so far is just showing you how to set this stuff up. Okay. Now they give you a bunch again of numbers and stuff in here, the rows and the columns and the start and the end, etc. And then the author says the numbers correspond to the vertical line that separates each column. And they're showing you that here. Do I expect this to totally make sense? No. And I believe that every time you go through this, you learn a little more. All right, but again, that's just my opinion. As it mentions there, these properties have a shorthand syntax as well, so you can take a look at it there. Another approach is mentioned right there is to set the starting column and row and set how many it should occupy using span. All right. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to lay out what we want the stuff on the web page to look like. All right, you've seen a few examples already. When you do this, you can also use what are called fractions. And they're kind of what you think a fraction would be. So it says here, specifying the exact width of each column or row is not ideal in every case. A fraction is a unit of space. So the following, as it says, would divide your grid into 3 columns. And since it's 1FR, 1FR, and 1FR, since they're all the same, each one of them is going to take up a third. Now, you don't have to do that. They don't have to all be the same size. As they mention here, you can even mix things. There's something called repeat, which, as it says there, is a special function that takes a number that indicates the number of times a row or column will be repeated and the length of each one. So if every column has got the same size, you can set it up like this. So there will be 4 columns, each will be 100 pixels wide. All right? Or you can do it in this case, if you wanted to set it up with fractions, each one would take up a quarter. Says common use case, have a sidebar that never collapses more than a certain amount of pixels when you resize the window, and then they give you an example of it. The only way that you learn, the only way that you understand this is to take something like the West Bowes course, because there's exercises up the wazoo in there. All right. By default, elements are positioned in the grid using their order in the HTML structure. Using grid template areas, you can define areas and move them around in a grid, as it says, and also use them to spawn an item onto multiple rows. All right. You can set an empty cell using dot instead of an area name. You can make a page, or you can make it a grid extend to fill a page using FR. All right. I think this is a good time right here to stop, because in the next section, they're going to build this. All right. So since we've got virtually everything that we've done is commented out, let's build this. So you get a header, you get a footer, you've got a sidebar, and you've got a main content area. So we'll take a look at that in just a couple minutes.